Hello everybody. I want to go ahead and welcome you to Ore Gallery and acknowledge that we are operating on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and also acknowledge that we operate within historic Chinatown and the communities that live here. It is my great honor to present to you our esteemed guests, Lisa Steele and Jon Davies, who have brought a pretty fascinating and wonderful show to our Artist-Run Center, which I think fits really well here. And so on behalf of our gallery coordinator, Katrina Getchen, and I'm very happy to present this stuff to you. I know some of you people here, but I don't know all of you. So my name is Jamie Ward, and I'm the program coordinator here at Ore Gallery. Today we're just going to have a talk between Jon and Lisa, and then after that we'll do a Q&A, and then we'll get you guys to go out to the bookstore for a little bit, have some coffee and refreshments, and we'll get everything going again, and then welcome you back in for the rest of the exhibition. So I'm going to stop rambling and give it over to Jon and Lisa. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Jon Davies. I just wanted to thank Jamie and Katrina, everyone at Ore Gallery for this opportunity. This is an exhibition that began in Los Angeles in 2018, bringing together the really transformative work that Lisa and Colin made in Los Angeles in this 9-month period between 1976 and 1977. And after Los Angeles, I went to Montreal and opened in the middle of the pandemic. So everything we did for that was remote and on Zoom. And then it was really nice to be here for the installation and to be together with Lisa here in person. And also to bring this work to Vancouver. I know for a number of you, this work is familiar, as Paul was saying yesterday. He's like a first-generation audience for this work. And so I'm really interested in kind of, how this work resonates with Vancouver's art histories and media art histories. And it's very grateful to be here. And maybe, Lisa, we could start with just how you and Colin met and your kind of working relationship before you decided to leave Toronto for this 9-month period and head west to California.
Well, we had, I'm pretty sure I said this to Paul, I think we probably initially met at Matrix, the big conference in what year, Paul?
1973.
73, yeah. And Colin was in Sackville and working at Mount Allison, where he taught at that point. And he had come to the conference. I was in Toronto, and I had come to the conference. So we had conversations and got along quite well. And then sometime later, maybe 74, 75, Colin and his then wife Janice Hook-Stratton, who's a painter, and their son Neil moved to Toronto. I think Colin was really tired of being in Mount Allison. It was a very small community, very, very, very small. If you've seen his Art Star pieces, they're really wonderful works to indicate what it's like to be an artist in such a small, very tight-knit community. So they're hilarious works. Anyway, we have them at V-Tape. We'd be glad to show them. But so he moved to Toronto, and then things evolved in both of our lives. He and Janice ended up separating, and I ended up separating from, I was with Tom Sherman at that point, who was also an artist. And then Colin and I got together. Mm-hmm. And I remember that AA, Bronson, and General Idea would have a party, and I think it was the first party we went to together, and AA was thrilled. Of course, he just loved this. It was like gossip beyond everything. So anyway, so that was very good, and we lived in Toronto. We lived on Brunswick Avenue, above some other people, in quite a nice little apartment. But Toronto felt too small. It felt too, and the arts community was too insulated, and we just thought, we need to get out of here. And it so happened that we both got, remember B grants? Right. We both got a B grant, and this enabled us. We thought, this is a lot of money. We can go somewhere and just do our work, but we didn't, because we did not want to stay in Toronto to try to do that. We wanted to break with whatever work we had done before and do something different. So and Colin had gone to graduate school at Claremont College, which is just outside of Los Angeles. And he had always loved LA, always, just thought it was the best place in the world. And he still had friends there. So he said, let's go to LA. And I was like, why not? I've never been to Los Angeles. That sounds great to me. So we had a car, like a little, it's in the pictures here. It was a Volkswagen station wagon, like a powder blue little Volkswagen station wagon. So we loaded everything up, and I had 2 cats, of course, at the time. Somebody kept the cats and mailed them to us, and when we arrived there. But we drove all across. We drove to Kansas City, where I'm from, and saw my family. And then from Kansas City, we just headed down into New Mexico, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, across the desert, and finally up into LA. And it was a wonderful trip. It was unbelievable. We saw so much. We saw the Grand Canyon. We saw just like things that neither of us had ever had that kind of a road trip before. So that was a kind of wonderful way to come into LA. And we stayed with his friend Michael and Irena, and Irena's she's Peruvian. She's in one of the tape, I think, in the middle or on the right-hand side there, if you look at it. We stayed, they had room for us, so we could stay with them for a little while until we found a place. But we found a place, I think, right away. I think it only took us a couple of weeks to find the little house, which is in the color picture in the vitrine. John found the house when he went back, and it looks exactly the same. Nothing has changed, which is unusual, I think, probably in Southern California. But anyway, so we found it, and we moved in, and right away, we had our own video equipment. I was telling somebody about it, that I had bought this equipment myself. We were working reel to reel. So the other thing to remember about all of this work, I think, is that it's what's called assemble edit. So that you did one shot, and then you let it run a little bit. Then when you were ready to do the second shot, you kind of backed it up a little bit, and then hit record, hit play record, and off you were on the second shot. So there is no other footage. It means that what is on the tape is everything that's on the tape. So that was the way we were both working at that point. Or just straight performance with the camera also, which we both did also. So we got there, we set ourselves up, and we started to work. And right away, I think, I had I had done the very first part of Waiting for Lancelot. I shot in our backyard and in the apartment we lived on in Toronto, but the rest of it was all shot in LA. And so I continued to make that work, but I also started, I think, right away to write another series. And Colin was writing The Woman from Malibu, I think almost right away. I think we got there in September. We got there in the midst of a presidential election, and Jimmy Carter was elected that year. And as soon as we got there, I remembered why I had left. Because American politics is so dreadful anyway. So we kind of knew we weren't going to stay. So at that point, we said, okay, we're going to, and everything in LA was so strange. There were the weirdest people. They did every story in these pieces was in Colin's work, was we read in the paper or we heard it on the radio or the TV. There were real stories. People who were fumigated to death in their houses. They were, like every one of these things actually happened. So he said, and we both said, I think, we're going to treat this as if we're anthropologists and we're studying these people. Because there was no way that we were going to be fitting in, and that seemed to fit. And we did hang out a little tiny bit with some of the people in the art scene because Colin still knew them. Billy Al Bankston, and who was did sculpture, and when Chris Burden and Colin had gone to school together. So Chris Burden was with a woman it wasn't her real name, but she called herself Alexis Smith, and she did a Scheherazade tent and told fortunes, and anyway, and Chris Burden was a weirdo, and but we would go to their studios and visit or whatever, but mostly we didn't really do that. We just did our own stuff. We read and studied, went to the desert a lot, and talked to each other about what the work was going on. And and my work, the scientist tapes, started right then. And the scientist tapes comes from a very particular point in time when Legionnaire's disease had happened. So scientists were all over TV all of a sudden. They were being interviewed, they were being talked to about how to cure this and how it got discovered and this and that. And also then, what do they call DNA? That was
the
being
human genome.
The human genome had been mapped, and all of a sudden they were being talked about all over. So I decided to make the scientist tapes, to make these two people having a long distance relationship who were both scientists. So that's where that came from. And the woman from Malibu was directly from the LA Times, which we subscribed to right away and read the paper every morning. And it was an interview with a woman who had watched her husband fall to his death in the Himalayas. And she was from Malibu. So that's where she came from. But a whole lot of it is just his invention. I mean, he just went from there and started going. So we had a little ritual when somebody would finish a title. We would go to Marina Del Rey, which was just down the road from Venice Beach, and we would have a drink in like a fancy bar because we couldn't really ever afford. We didn't have money enough to afford to go out anywhere, so we never ate out, and we. But we would go to this fancy bar and have one drink, after we finished work. So that was a little ritual.
Right. It was very modest, monk-like.
Modest and monk-like. We shopped once a week. We had our budget, and we kept to it because we had to stretch this money. And toward the end, we thought we might try to extend our stay, and so because we had our own video equipment, we thought we would work for real estate companies. This didn't pan out, but we investigated it, and then we finally said, okay. And so we went in September, and we came back in May. And we drove back with the cats in the car. And what that meant was that we couldn't leave the car. Like, we had to stay in the car because the cats could escape. And so you had to get out of the car very carefully, and we stayed overnight in Las Vegas, which we hadn't gone through Las Vegas on the way there, but we went on the way home and left the cats in the hotel room in a little cage, and they were really mad when we got back. But we got to see Las Vegas that way, and we saw it was in Circus was just there. It was the new casino, and the kind of nearly nude models were flying around on trapezes and things. It was fabulous.
That was an amazing overview. Such a great period of activity. One thing you didn't mention was the Ballad of Dan Peoples and your visit to your family. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. The Ballad of Dan Peoples was, which I think is it's up here, when we went through Kansas City to see, I saw my dad and stepmother, and I was raised a lot my parents separated when I was quite young, and I've spent a lot of time with my grandparents. And so that, and my grandmother had died years before, but my grandfather was, and he was declining. And my brother had him, because there wasn't much money, had him admitted to the Jackson County Home for the Aged, where it was a place, who could look after elderly people. And I had seen him there a couple of years before, and it took him a little while, and then he recognized me, and then we had a talk and blah, blah, blah. This time he was not conscious. And so I went there. I, went up to see him, and he seemed, he wasn't conscious, but I spoke to him and talked to him and, had this whole experience with him. Then we drove on and we went to, as I say, to Texas, and we did the rest of our trip, which took another probably a week or maybe 10 days. And, there's no cell phones or anything, or email or anything like that at this point. And when I got to California, I don't know if I called my brother or if I wrote to my brother and gave him our address. And my brother told me then that my grandfather had died that night after I had seen him. And I was so affected by that, because what I really wanted to do, I had always wanted to record his because he told amazing stories. Because he was the son of he was a very small man. He was about 5 feet tall, very slight, and he was the son of a huge man who was the sheriff. And they were, and I'm from the place, Kansas City. He was from the Ozarks, and he was from a place called Versailles. Which, so he was the youngest of what they call the first litter. His father had 3 wives and 22 children, and he was the youngest. And he had curly white blonde hair, so they dressed him in dresses his whole childhood. And they called him Clerk, and but his real name was Dan Peoples. And so I had wanted to record his voice. And so I started, I think, Jamie, I don't know if you're here, I think you were going to ask me this question. How many times did it take me to actually make the recording I made? And I think it was probably 4 or 5 attempts. And the same thing is true of Personal Story, which is also, I think, plays it here, so maybe not. No, it's where I tell the day my mother died. But with this one, I would get the camera set up, and I would sit and I would try to tell the story, or I would try to tell some of these stories that my grandfather had told me, and I could never get it. So I'd try again. Finally, I put on a shirt, which people have said it belonged to him. It didn't, of course. It was just a man's shirt. It was probably Colin's shirt. And I put the shirt on, and I held the picture. And I had the first line of it, which is, I come up over the hill. I've seen him stand there about half a mile down the road. I come up over the hill, and I knew that then I would sing it. So I thought, okay, I can sing this. So I sang this thing for a period of time. I don't know how long it is. And when it was finished, I stopped and I didn't watch it. And my brother came to visit us about, 2 or 3 weeks later, stayed with us. And he was my brother's a writer, and he was doing he was writing a book about Howard Hughes. So he was out in LA researching Hughes. So I said I wanted him to watch it. So he watched it with me. And neither one of us had ever talked about this, but there were all kinds of funny stories that he had told, but I didn't tell those stories. I told the story about him being beaten by his father. And we had never been touched. I mean, we were completely abused as children. And so this has obviously made such an impression on me, I had repressed it for all of those years. And then, so we had a really great talk about that after that. So that's and at the very end, when the time that I had, the end of the tape, it starts to talk about beautiful mules. And it was not the time that right before he died, but the time previous to this, we would walk around and, we would go down different corridors of this quite a large facility. And he would stop. He was trying to get me to, let's go outside, let's go home now, okay? Like, he wanted out. But I said, no, we can't do that, Granddad. So, but he would point down one hallway and talk about the beautiful mules. And an orderly or someone walked by at that point, and he said, "Oh, Mr. Peoples, you remember when this was the stable for the county, and they kept the mules here, who they used to plow the roads and stuff like that." And he said, "Yeah, you remember when it was the stable." So that, because I thought he was just hallucinating or something, but in fact he was. It was his memory, so it's at the very end of that piece.
It's a really amazing story, and I think, both Colin's work and then your work, there was focus on creating personas and this idea of kind of mediating, what you're taking in from the outside world through this character, but the word character doesn't seem right. It's kind of more... So there's so much of the self in it as well. So I just love that it's almost like this primal scene of you, this like channeling or almost seance of your grandfather in this moment was kind of this, creation of this persona, and then that way of working ended up becoming so important. I'm curious what your observations were of the creation of the woman from Malibu, because the whole body of work that Colin made in California was focused on this one persona. So what was, what were your kind of observations of that process, and what did you make of your partner donning these wig and sunglasses and earrings? And
we went shopping together for outfits, and the LA has fantastic Salvation Army stores, so that was a source for all our stuff, like everything, including dishes and everything that I still have some of them, but we would think about different things. And in the very first Woman from Malibu, he, at the very end of it, he's Colin again, and I'm combing his hair and taking a picture. That we're doing a photo shoot, and he has a bowling shirt on, that black shirt that. And that was my shirt that I had gotten at the Salvation Army. And also the hand belt with the two hands that we had. So you gradually, we got the wigs, because we both got wigs, and which you can see in the picture back there. I had a long blonde one, and he had a curly blonde wig. And so then, I had I had a thing of makeup that was like, because I don't wear makeup at all, but it was like like clown makeup or something, which we then started to work on him with, to make his eyebrows smaller and to do all the, to give him his look. So we sort of created that character together, because he needed some help to do it sometimes. And, but it was it didn't seem unusual to me at all that he would take on a female persona, because it seemed Colin was always so. Colin had many women friends, and women were very, would confide in Colin always. So he was just that kind of person. So it seemed to me that he could then go on the other side of that and then become a persona who was a female. And so gradually he began to accumulate details, in particular the death threats. And those were, I don't know where he got those exactly, but he thought that was an important, and I don't think it was in the original story. I think that those were that was his invention. But it certainly deepened the character and pulled a lot more from her experience and of being alone, And something about that way of describing the where she is watching her husband die, and she's so blank, that I think he did that in order to underscore the way that the whole of Los Angeles kind of people, the personas of these people, were so odd and so distanced and so much about the movies. That they watch things as if they watch their lives as if they were watching a movie, and that was very clear. And we went to the opening of A Star Is Born, but no, we didn't go to the movie. We went to stand outside with all the people watching while the Barbara Streisand and all the people came, and I guess probably Joan Didion and John Gregory Dunn, because they wrote it, right? So they were probably there too. But and I was reading Joan Didion at that point, so that would have been very meaningful for me. But yeah, this relationship with movies was so it was so important to our interpretation, and that comes through very strongly, I think, in the character of the woman from Malibu.
That's really interesting, because I was thinking like a quintessential LA kind of interface is like driving and kind of seeing the city through like the screen of the windshield, and just the idea of like a city of surfaces. But then I find the language in all the videos, because one of your characters says, they're always insisting on correct terminology, like because there's that precision of being able to have the distance. Like it does kind of go deep and have this kind of analytical take on what's happening. And so I just thought maybe you could talk a bit about the transition in your use of language and the relationship between language and images, say between something like Waiting for Lancelot and then the Scientist tapes. Because they do seem quite different.
They are, yeah. I think Waiting for Lancelot is it's a retelling of the Lancelot Guinevere, story, and she is murdered by the man she has left at the very end of it, and so she's dead at the end, and then but she talks about the. And I think all throughout it, she is talking about love and love relationships and what that means what it and how dangerous it is to love. That it is truly you lose yourself when you love, and that's an important part about that. When I went to make the scientist tapes, I wanted to make a completely different persona and series, so I really based it on this scientific language that, and I subscribed to, at that point, I started subscribing to a magazine called Science News, which was for lay people, and it was just, it was, I think it was once a month, and you would get it, and it would be summations of all of this, discoveries of this and this scientific thing and this and all this kind of thing. So I had all of this terminology kind of kicking around in my brain. In a way, I've always been very interested in science, particularly like biology and botany and stuff like that. So that was going on, and but I really wanted to make a love relationship that had a completely different approach to language. And I think that you're quite right. It does. It uses precision and precise terms, and in ways that you kind of can't. Why does she get sick? She gets a tick bite or something? Yeah, right. Anyway,
probably Lyme disease.
Probably, I know. Anyway, it's
very uncanny watching it now. Like, I wouldn't say post, but like, after the experience of COVID-19 and just that, that kind of the collapse of like a scientific discourse into like media discourse or spectacle. And one thing that I was wondering about that I haven't asked you about before, I just spent a few years writing a dissertation about the close relationship between artistic and sexual experimentation in San Francisco. And a lot of artists were involved early on in the pornographic film scene, which was almost like artisanal in San Francisco in like the early 70s or late 60s. But by the end of the 70s, porn was kind of everywhere. And it was centered in Southern California. And so I'm just curious how much kind of porn was a context or a kind of reference point, because there's that amazing scene that you narrate in the scientist tapes describing like a gay porn or a gay sex scenario. And then you also had that the amazing multi-channel piece, Internal Pornography. And I was thinking, Colin talked about this transformation that happened in Los Angeles is moving from external fiction to internal fiction. And I thought, it's interesting, he says internal fiction, you say internal pornography, or at least for that piece. And so, I was just curious if that was kind of a reference point, or even thinking of Las Vegas or what the visual kind of landscape of Las Vegas looked like.
Well, it was a part of, we made a habit of frequenting gay male clubs, and we would go together. And so there was a lot of, that was something that we seemed to like to do. So it was, so there was I don't think we watched. Well, we watched, the stuff that was around at that point, Behind the Green Door, and what's the other one? The really famous one.
Deep Throat.
Deep Throat, yes. And so it was part of our environment. So I
was thinking too that pornography kind of promises this like extreme, like almost clinical precision, like showing everything, but then it's all in the service of kind of ideologies around gender and power as well. So it's kind of this misleading like transparency or misleading precision. And so I was just interested in that, the way that there's maybe a parallel kind of promise of revelation. That's
it's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I don't know if it was just kind of, I don't know, just something that we did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then I noticed in a lot of the tapes you aren't necessarily talking to each other as much as you're talking to the camera or
right.
to a recording device. And I know in Colin's work, often a character is repeating something that they read in a letter or that they overheard.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're rarely just seeing two people have a conversation. There's usually like a remove. And so I'm just wondering about the sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Well, first of all, you have this very close, I would call collaborative relationship where you are living and working together making these tapes, but then each tape you're making is very much your own mm-hmm. and not co-authored. Mm-hmm. So it'd be great if you could talk a little bit about the intimacy, but also the distance mm-hmm. Between the two of you, and then also how you changed your thinking about visuals and your use of images, because something like Waiting for Lancelot is very there's a divide between the voice and mm-hmm. and what's shown, whereas it feels like most of what was made in California was a direct mm-hmm. kind of recording to the camera. So can you talk a bit about that?
It was, we didn't, I didn't want to use too much voiceover anymore. Mm-hmm. And I don't think, I think that, the difference is also that Colin was in all of the scientist tapes. Mm-hmm. And I was only in one shot of The Woman from Malibu
right.
in that. So it was a very, but we shot each other's, we set up, like if we were doing his work, then he would, he'd set the camera where he wanted it. He'd, figure out how to, how to do that, how to turn it on, etc. And, set up the shot. And then I would just carry out his instructions. And when we're both in, it was a little trickier, but that it was, I would set it up in terms of what I wanted, and then we'd figure out how to actually, who was sitting close enough to the camera, mm-hmm. or to the deck to turn it on. But it was, the logistics were challenging sometimes. Mm-hmm. But it was, the separation was always complete. Like you really, and sometimes we would, if he had finished a script, he would want me to read it, mm-hmm. and the same thing with for him to read mine. But I can't ever recall making a comment or suggesting anything, mm-hmm. nor can I recall him doing that for me. It was, they were really separate. So there was tremendous, artistic autonomy, but yet, making them all together, like we were together for all of them. So it was funny. It was part of the project and part of, I think, the reason we went, because we hadn't collaborated at all before this, before we got to LA. We hadn't done anything together, really, that I can recall. And so this was like a move. Like it was, and it seemed to occur naturally. And I
think that's why I keep coming back to these works, is just that tension between closeness and distance, and what is there in the intimacy, but then what's also kept to oneself, mm-hmm. and then when you throw the personas
right.
into the mix and fiction into the mix, it becomes even more complicated. Maybe one last question before we open it up to the audience. That when the Canada Council money ran out and you had to go back to Toronto, what did do you feel like your kind of point of view or your vision had changed? I think when I look at your work like Making Strange or The Damages and the really profound kind of use of personas there, did that come from this experience, do you think, or what were the kind of lessons?
Probably. I mean, when we had to come home, then the work that was made directly after this was completely informed by our experience of coming back to Toronto. Because I went back to work at the women's shelter. I worked at Interval House for many years, and I went back to work at Interval House. So those stories, Gloria and all of that, that's all from my experience of working at a women's shelter. And Colin became a Xerox technician at Wood Gundy in downtown Toronto. And so that's where Robin came from. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, So we just kept working kind of in a sense in that way. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Are there any questions? We can also chat more informally during the opening too. Yeah.
So what fascinating talk, by the way. I the background story, the stuff I never knew.
Oh.
That just with characters come from the collaborative process, because I always saw them as individual works.
Okay.
So why did you want to bring these works together, and how did you just...
Yeah, I mean,
as the curator, actually go back these 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I'd been familiar with Colin's work for a long time in the Woman from Malibu series, and so I kind of knew that that's where she had originated, but then I am always kind of looking at what the intimate relationships and friendships and kind of social network around the artist is. And so it became clear that, that time in Los Angeles was something that was very intimately shared between Colin and Lisa. And then, so I thought, okay, I know these works of the Woman from Malibu, but what else did they do there? What was, exactly when did they arrive? When did they leave? And we very kindly sat down with me and we kind of had like a long interview kind of trying to piece together exactly what happened when. And then realizing that this is like a really cohesive and specific body of work that came through that experience of being somewhere new and of observation and this kind of almost like losing a line between the self and the world, or using the self to process what's coming in from the world. And and then I wanted to kind of return it to Los Angeles for the first version of the show, because the work had shown a little bit there, but wasn't really kind of part of like the city's kind of media art history, as it was kind of not as remembered or as archived. Right. So I wanted to bring it back to that, and then we did it at the One Archives, which is a specifically queer archive that's at USC. So I was interested in introducing that context as well, and
it fit really well there. I think I think the thing that isn't that when you, particularly with the Woman from Malibu, what you don't, like every story, I was just remembering some, like there's, she talks about the pony skeletons. Well, we were at a party and, and I went to, in some, fabulously wealthy, some collector, and somehow we got invited to this party. We didn't get invited to many parties, but this was very memorable. And the host played chess with one of the artists throughout the entire thing, like that. He didn't even say hello to anybody. And so we were all wandering around. They had this amazing, astonishing art collection, and like the Navajo blanket things and incredible stuff and just amazing. And it was one of those houses that in LA where the part of it is here and you're looking out over the roof of the lower part of it, which is all pebbles and stuff. And I went to the bathroom recently and I look out and there's like a skeleton out there. I'm thinking, what is this skeleton out here? So I told Colin, he went up and he looked at it. So then finally we asked the person who had invited us to the party, the host or whatever. He said, the guy collects pony skeletons in the desert.
Right.
So of course Colin had it was too good.
Yeah.
But
memorable hobby.
yes, memorable hobbies. But so all of these various stories were we either read them in the paper or so, and I think sometimes we point out things to each other. Sometimes never, but as I say, never ever offered anything to suggest or to correct anything or to change anything in each other's scripts. That was off the table. Yeah.
Did you mention that Colin had attracted a stalker as
yes,
well?
Yes, yeah. Somebody who called at night.
Wow.
And we kind of thought we knew who it was, but I would never say. But who would call it, like 1 or 2 in the morning, and he would answer the phone, and they would just breathe, and that kind of thing. It's quite scary in its own way.
Yeah, it's a
but
violent landscape, not just a kind of pop culture landscape.
Yeah.
Like
and
ominous.
the Mansons were still around. I mean, they were in jail, but that whole era was happening just as we, just right before we got there. So the desert was also a beautiful place, but also really quite terrifying. At night especially. We tried to sleep in the desert overnight, and we couldn't do it. We because we could sleep in this little car and everything, so we went out to the dune, the singing dunes that that are in his pieces, and we thought, well, we'll just stay overnight, and then we can see dawn in the desert. We just couldn't do it, because you're out there, and you see 20, 30, 40 miles away, you see like a light, and you're like, and then it's getting closer. You're like, uh-oh, what's going to happen? So yeah, we could not keep it up anyway. So we got back in the car and went home.
Imagine the cats wouldn't like the desert much either. Any other questions?
I'm going to follow up on the question first, because you showed us the queer environment. I don't want to label, but this gender bending. I mean, was this, you're with this man, you're intimate with, and you're gender bending, you're going to queer pornography. Is this the transition of Colin becoming a queer man?
Well, Colin, he's a complicated man. Yeah. He was a very complicated man, a lovely man, but very complicated. And Colin had it, and I think this is well known, I'm sure you knew it at the time, Greg, but that Colin separated from his wife, Janice, and they had a son together. And Neil was only 6 or 7, I think, when they separated. But because he was coming out, that was what was happening. So Colin comes out, and then Colin gets together with me. So it's a complication that he didn't see coming, and that that it just seemed natural somehow. He was living in New York after he had separated, and he was living in New York, and he invited me to come down, and I went down to visit him, and he, somehow we became lovers, and I don't know if he had invited me down for that reason or if it just happened, but it was very, this is the complexity of him. But so he was a gay man, but he was, I guess he was truly bisexual. That it, although his after, and yes, and after. Well, then, I mean, he and John Grayson were together for a number of years. He and Carrie Quinter, he had another female partner, were together. So, I mean, he was fluid, his affection, he didn't interfere with his affections.
It does feel that there wasn't that he was prophesied vocabulary that we have now, or that we had maybe starting in the 90s, that I would imagine didn't exist in the same way.
Didn't exist, no. No, you would have, I mean, he had always known he was gay. And he told me. He'd always known it. And, but it wasn't accepted when he was growing up. I think that's the truth. So he followed a more traditional path and got married, had a child, went to graduate school, did the whole thing, got a teaching job. And, it was, in coming back to Toronto from Mount Allison, I think was where he felt that he could now maybe kind of come out. But as I say, the fluidity of his sexuality was unusual. But it didn't feel at all unusual to me that we would dress up, that we would go and buy wigs. It was just what we did. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I mean, I've never done anything like that with anyone else.
Maybe that's his gift, is making that seem like the most ordinary thing in the
world. It was absolutely the most ordinary thing. We kind of scouted around, and I think we had to buy real wigs. I don't think we bought those at the Salvation Army. I think those were real, like from a wig shop somewhere. But all the other costumes and different things, and assembling the costumes, and kind of getting them right, and then assembling the makeup, and making sure we had makeup and the rings and stuff. Those were my rings, but that were mine or my grandmother's or something. I mean, the big cameo thing, and which he used particularly when he's making the salad.
Oh yeah, talking about the salad.
Yes, the salad, and that is based on my stepmother, who was a very big. She was high up in the Democratic Party of the state of Missouri, which was a big thing. Like, she was flown around to, she organized different things and whatever. But she's the one who did. So what they, one tomato, one this. That's her description of a salad, which Colin was just entranced with. It was like, wow, this is wild. So he had to use that, of course. But he chose very well what he wanted to do. Yeah.
Maybe one last thing to mention is the fluidity, not just around sexuality but around gender as well. Yeah. Like, I know he talked about, he didn't really know how to be a man, and I feel like there just wasn't a vocabulary. Like, if you believed that, you weren't supposed to tell anyone that you were supposed to fake it.
Yeah.
But he made, his art, beginning at this moment, was kind of, I'm told I'm a man, but I don't know what that means, and I would much rather speak as a woman, basically, or whatever, and wrestling with that. And so, I mean, there's. And the vocabulary I grew up with is very different than the vocabulary that there is now. So it's these things that are changed so much and determine what's possible in terms of identification and community. So.
Well, it's funny. I guess it was probably because we didn't do any of this in Toronto. Mm-hmm. It all happened in LA. Mm-hmm. Like, it just kind of freed us to just, because there's no one around, no friends, no family, no anybody to keep tabs on you. Mm-hmm. So, you could dress up and
walk into the desert in your skirt.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, thank you so much. I always love being in conversation with you, and yeah, thank you all for coming. And yeah.